Welcome to Taming Technology, the podcast from the University of Akureyri, where we explore how artificial intelligence and emerging technologies are reshaping the world around us. My name is Magnus Mauri, and today's guest sits at the fascinating intersection of psychology, ideology, and innovation in scientific communication. Dr. Sean Rife is an associate professor of psychology at Murray State University and the co-founder of Scite, a groundbreaking research tool using deep learning to bring context and impact. He is also a leading voice in moral and political psychology, open science reform, and the psychology of online activism and expression. His work asks timely questions. How do people express their values in digital spaces? Can science become more honest and transparent? And what happens when AI enters the publishing ecosystem? Sean, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Magnus. It's great to be here.
So the reason for this podcast is that we are very proud that the University of Akureyri to have made a 2-year agreement with Scite, making it accessible to our faculty and students. And we are just announcing this podcast is a part of the announcement we are making. So if you could just start by telling us a little bit about the origins of Scite.
Sure. Yeah. No. And we're really excited to be a part of to be on board at your institution. And thank you for the kind intro. Yeah, so yeah, Scite got started back in, I guess we started working on the project that would become Scite back in 2016, founded the company in 2018, and was really started out really just being about citations. So we were just really interested in, can you, everyone has counts of citations. How many citations has this author received? How many citations has a paper received? But what we were really interested in initially was this idea of, all right, can you actually drill down into the content of citations? So what one paper says about another paper, for example, and is there a way to quantify that? Is there a way to, include that as a sort of measurement, or a way of bringing greater context to our understanding of how a paper has been received? And so we started working on basically using some AI to classify citations as, like one of 3 types. On our article reports pages, if you go to any the page that we have for any published scientific paper, you can see basically what other papers have said about that paper and how we've classified them as, supporting a scientific claim, contrasting a scientific claim, or maybe just mentioning a paper sort of in passing. And so that was the original project. We were really, again, just sort of from a meta science perspective, interested in, could you drill down and get more detail from the scientific citation ecosystem than maybe folks were originally getting with just sort of nose counts of citations. And that developed into we eventually built a search platform on that, and then built out an AI tool, Scite Assistant, which is based on that same data that we used in our search and article report tools. And one of the things that sort of makes Scite a bit different along all 3 avenues is that we have data that we get from open access papers, but we also have data that we get from publishers themselves who will give us the access to the full text of their closed access papers. So we have a very unique data set in terms of what we're able to analyze.
So you're doing this, starting out in 2016, then you start the company in 2018, and you're making these classification models based on like the traditional ML models. Like, were you aware of, or did you like have some sixth sense of what like the deep learning, where it was going at that time? Because one of the interesting things that I see about Scite is both that there's a little bit of luck for the timing, and then that you're using like a responsible use of like the deep learning technology as like a cherry on top with the assistant that we might discuss a little bit later also.
Yeah, so no, definitely. There is a certain amount of luck that comes into it. I should say that our citation classifications. I set out originally working on that project using much more traditional machine learning techniques, but what we use today is a deep learning classifier that we've trained to do that. So it's it's a bit more sophisticated than what I came up with in some of the initial prototypes.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, it certainly is the case that we've been able to build out a set of products that I think are really they have a lot of advantage in the technology itself, but a lot of the advantage is also just in the data that we've been very fortunate to have on hand as in building out those tools.
Yeah. Uh, and now, like the amount of scientific literature that is being published uh, daily or monthly is has been almost on an exponential curve of uh, like volume. There's so much volume of science coming out, and so I think that, that the platform is platforms like these will have almost like a requirement for further research in the coming years. Do you agree with that, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I'll say this. So I did my PhD on basically social media and social support seeking. Um, which is very different than the sort of things I'm interested in today. So I've had to really over the past few years spend a lot of time just reorienting myself to a very different and to me fairly new literature on moral psychology. Um, and I was already familiar with some of that literature already, but that experience of really sort of coming into a new area of scientific investigation and having to sort of understand the different nuances and different theories and everything has really made me appreciate on a very personal level just how difficult it is to get your head around any scientific topic with the appropriate level of nuance. And I think it really we probably were already in a place. I would say probably this was the case 10 years ago or becoming the case that it was really not manageable to get to understand all the different publications that were hitting the literature all the time. It's this volume and velocity of scientific publications that we're constantly having to deal with. I think that really the AI technology will make that a lot more manageable, and is pretty much at this point I think probably is essential to that process. You really cannot. I mean, it used to be the case that, I've got on my shelf here some journals I subscribed to, and, you could just sort of get the top journals in the field and just sort of go through the table of contents and find the ones that were relevant to you, what or that seemed interesting. And that was a perfectly valid way of keeping up with the literature. I just don't see that as necessarily being the case anymore, given all the different avenues of publication, the large number of journals, the existence of preprints. Um, Social media being used to promote a lot of findings that might have been, ignored otherwise. I think it's a great development, but it does present some new challenges that I think will be really uniquely, you make AI uniquely useful in tackling those challenges. So,
Yeah, and it's a when I'm discussing AI here at the university with especially with the researchers and the professors and teachers, is that this is we're in a paradigm shift, and it has been coming for a while because of the vast uh, just looking at, like we were discussing about the volume of publications, to be able to stay on top of like the most recent agreed, like uh, yeah, the most recent literature and how it has been accepted and how it's been supported or mentioned as Scite does, and therefore it's like because we've been doing this in a very close collaboration with librarians here at the university, which I think they have played like a key role and will also play a key role in the integration of and application of Scite in courses here. That the separating like the there was a review I read like separating the toys from the tools.
yeah, excellent. No, and we're very we love our librarian colleagues, and we're always very happy to work with them. I think One of the important roles of the academic librarian with respect to Scite is that they know the unique needs of all the different parts of a given institution. They know what different faculty in different schools or different departments are, what their particular use cases are for all the different products that we provide. And yeah, I mean, I always say, we want to aid the librarians at our partner institutions in serving the faculty and students at that institution, but there's no way we could do that on our own because we just don't have that sort of deep knowledge of what the various institutional needs are.
Mm-hmm. And how has like in your partner institutions, how has Scite been met? Like, uh, have you faced some skepticism or pushback from academics and faculty?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are always. I guess it depends on the sort of the product that what site product you're talking about. If you're talking about our search facility or our article reports, that sort of assessment component of what we do, that's probably less controversial today than it was when we first came out years ago. But certainly, we do get pushback from certain faculty on the AI tool, Site Assistant. So, chat GPT for research. And I think, it's interesting because I think this is probably, the resistance to that kind of tool, I think really hit its peak shortly after ChatGPT became after the release of 3.5 and this sort of everyone becoming aware of it. You had this sort of, I think, maybe year-long period after that where the resistance to that kind of technology really reached its peak. And I get the sense that today there's much more sort of acceptance, even among more skeptical faculty, that this kind of technology is going to, it's going to exist, and we have to learn how to at the very least coexist with it. So I've seen, I guess, less resistance or less skepticism over the past probably year, even at my own institution, where there are still professors who are understandably critical of some aspects of the technology, and I want to be open about that, and so yeah, there are parts of the technology that could use improvement or they are going to pose unique challenges, and we're going to have to figure out how to deal with that, and that is going to hurt sometimes. That's going to be a somewhat difficult process in some respects.
Yeah, I think we share the same view on those topics because I think also that the professors and faculty that are resistant to the technology, but that I have felt that they are becoming more informed, and therefore like their arguments are becoming better, and also that their role in like navigating this space, because I've been discussing that we have to accept that there is the terms like responsible AI use or AI use in academia, they are not established yet. They are forming. So there's a very interesting time to be able to partake in it because we can really have an effect on how we come out the other end. No, like not going into like futuristic uh, like forecasting, but this is like the new reality of academia, that these tools will shape the future of education.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this has been, I think, probably the area where I guess, in terms of the actual adapting to the technology, that's sort of been what I've been focusing on a lot as, someone who is, in the classroom, every day, is, how do we adapt our research and teaching to not only, deal with the fact that this technology exists and it's going to impact the way that we teach and do research. I think the way that I do research, it's almost all positive in that respect. It's all, these are additional tools that I can use to help me understand areas of the literature that maybe I didn't even know about, a year ago. Um, but with respect to, using it in teaching, that's a little more challenging because there are good parts of it, but there are also, parts of the way that we teach that we have to adjust because the technology exists. So I guess that's where sort of I wouldn't even call it negative, but that's where some of the harder work has to be done is on the teaching end as a faculty member.
Yeah, and I think you're right about that, and also that uh, perhaps getting your insight into, because I've been discussing that using AI tools in basically anything is it's like a 20% introduction and watching some course material or YouTube videos or anything, and then it's like you have to train yourself on using it. You have to be uh, like getting familiar with working with an AI that is responding to you in a human-like fashion and understanding how it's creating its text or whatever you're creating, because then you start to be able to apply it as an extension of yourself. If you become like addicted to the tool, then you're just feeding the machine.
Yeah, this is what I spend a lot of time actually in not every class, but in I spend a little time in every class, but certainly in certain research methods classes or statistics classes, that we have, basically talking about how to how to use these tools productively, recognizing the fact that you do need to, for example, sometimes check their work, right? You do need
Mhm.
to, as I like to say, the old Russian proverb that Americans are convinced was actually attributed to Ronald Reagan. Trust but verify, right? You want to be able to trust these tools, and that's fine, but you also want to bring in a little bit of an eye of skepticism towards them and check their work. And you know that there's really, you really see that. I always say that, I can talk about this in class as a professor, or I can give webinars, but really the only way of getting a really good sense of how these tools should be used is just by spending time playing with them on your own, asking questions that you may, in some cases, may already know the answer to, and sort of see what their response is and see where the strengths and weaknesses are. um, it's the thing you don't want to do is go into it blind and start, using it on, a paper that you're writing that, is going to be published, and not understanding some of those strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, yeah. As we see it, as because we want, uh, I mean, the reason I'm here is because we recognize that students are currently using AI, and we want them to like use it responsibly, or like develop the concept of responsible AI use, because the labor market will demand of them to use the technology. But then there's also like uh, teachers and faculty and like the staff of the university has to become very quickly AI literate to be able to be the mentors that the students need. But like there's a balance between the using, for example, a tool like Scite as a bridge to academic literacy, but then there's a risk of like over reliance, uh, uh, because it's very hard to you have to explain it to a student so that he understands it. Have you had those challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know how much detail you want to get into, but yeah, this is, because, and I always say to my students, I have my biases because, this is one, the company I founded does this. And all my students get free access to Site because I'm their professor and I have that luxury. Um, but, yeah, so there are a few things that I do that I think I've really settled on as being kind of, at least right now, the sort of core of my approach to using this technology in the classroom. Um, one is that I explicitly say that my students are free to use AI tools in the completion of their assignments, unless I tell them, unless I ask otherwise. Um, and the only caveat that I have to that is that if they use an AI tool to complete an assignment, they just need to note somewhere in what they turn in what tool they used and how they used it. Could be as simple as a sentence or two, and or a footnote to the title page of the paper. But that's what I call, disclosure. I can't get upset with you if you told me exactly what you did and you were completely forthcoming about it, unless I told you not to. And there are a couple of assignments where I do say, hey, no AI on this one. And it's interesting because I think it really is possible to, and we go through this process. It is possible to actually teach, not only, sort of, dealing with the fact as a problem this technology exists, but really embracing it, and demonstrating for students how it can be used. So that's sort of one thing. And the other is that, when I teach like research methods or writing intensive classes, I'm very explicit in, we spend days going through, how to use Site Assistant, and we have nice smaller sections. I'm able to sort of go through each student as they're doing their queries and sort of walk them through, okay, you were searching for this, so you asked it this question that provided you this answer, which isn't really, what you're getting at. So maybe rephrase it and ask it to talk about these things in particular, or now you've got, or maybe it did give the answer that they were looking for. And so now they're wondering sort of what the next steps are. And I always say, the next step is to actually find the papers that it references, go get them. This is not a get out of jail free card in terms of having to read the papers, right? You do still need to understand at that level of nuance what's in those papers. And, I may ask you at some point, well, why did this particular study, use this variation of the methodology? I see you discuss that in your introduction section, but can you explain what the advantage there was? And, if they don't know, it's, like, no, you need to understand that level of nuance. That's what we're asking you to do. So, it doesn't, get rid of that element of having to actually engage with the broader literature, but it does make it easier to find that literature and to get a summary of it. And, it does make that part of the writing process, that much easier. And I think we need to embrace that, as you said, I guess, just a second ago, other people who are in the job market, who are going to apply to grad programs, they're going to be using this technology. And I think it's actually, I would be doing my students a disservice if I didn't help them prepare for that reality. So,
Yeah, and just looking at the draft policy that we are introducing to some higher ups tomorrow, like we have been developing this principle that the students and staff and faculty are free to use AI, like as long as they are adhering to like the same principles that apply in general, just to like GDPR and like copyright and ethical, like the ethical boundaries that are in place right now. And then we are going to like develop it with faculty, like how they are experiencing with using the technology, and also like if they are limiting in either in the syllabus or in certain projects that in this project you're not allowed to use AI, how it will reflect in like testing or how it will be measured, because I think that will be one of the, I think students will realize pretty soon that if they are being trained to use it responsibly, that the importance of the projects that are like don't use AI there, it has to be like they have to understand why.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is actually something that I've really made a shift toward. I have really, I've done a lot of things in response to this technology, but one of the things that I think is the more important ones is I've really had sort of a shift away from smaller out of class, homework assignments, and away from I think in the fall I'll be teaching my first term that doesn't have any class with an actual major term paper as sort of the deliverable at the end of the class, and really shifting towards presentations with a Q&A at the very end. So it's a sort of mini sort of like defense or dissertation defense or oral defense. And doing that and using that as a way of assessing knowledge and comprehension, on the one hand, and also as another tool for that, using in-class exams, open-ended questions on in-class exams. Because we do, it's just simply the reality. We do need to know that students know the things that we are teaching them. That is, the existence of this technology does not, dispose of that necessity. So we do still need to be able to assess that. And I think really, that just, I give more exams now, and I give longer exams now than I used to, because I am, including that sort of knowledge and application and comprehension component within the exams themselves. Whereas, 10 years ago, I relied more heavily on out of class homework assignments and stuff that would be much more easily to just simply plug into an AI tool and get the answer there. So yeah, it's just changing the way that we do all aspects of teaching.
Have you experimented with allowing students to use AI during tests?
I have not, and I've thought about this. This is a great question. I've thought about this a lot, um, and at this point, for me, really, the point of I guess the reason I give exams and the reason I rely on exams is really that, I do want students to be able to demonstrate that they understand, this theory and its implications and can do that on their own. I don't ever want to say that, that's the thing that we farmed out to the, the AI tools. Um, I I guess I do have a version of that where I do have a graduate research methods and statistics course, where uh, I do have students complete take home exams. So one of them is actually an in class exam, but there are three others that are basically take home, and and so that I'm fine, for example, with, if they're having trouble, understanding how to describe, how to interpret a regression coefficient in a mediation model. I'm more okay with them leaning more heavily on the technology for that interpretation in that context.
Mhm.
Um, just because I feel like it's a more complicated thing, and if they're actually in the process of engaging with it and writing it up, then I have a little more faith that they are going to be able to understand it as part of doing that engaging with it as part of that process. But I'm more all in on exams today than say I was, say 5 years ago.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I think that's like during this turmoil and the chaotic era that we're in. I think that like classical testing is like a, a good standard to adhere to, and but I somehow feel like I think DTU, that Danish Technological University, is allowing AI in some exams. So
oh, interesting.
it's gonna very very interesting to follow that, but that comes with a whole set of new challenges. So I don't think it's a requirement yet, but I think somewhere down the line is that like the AI use will be a part of how courses are evaluated, or how students are evaluated, because you have to demonstrate that you are using it efficiently and correctly.
Yeah, no, I think that I mean, I think we're getting there. I think, in another 5, 10 years, this will probably be a very different conversation. Just in terms of university of institutions having a sort of native AI component to their mission.
Mhm.
In the same way that, we just kind of expect students to be able to engage in some kind of fact finding, using Google or any other piece of technology. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm glad to hear that y'all are actually in the process of adopting a policy on that. I think that I used to not be such. I used to be sort of on the fence about whether or not sort of institution-wide AI policies were a useful thing. I'm a big advocate of academic freedom, and the professors should be able to teach in the way that they see as the most appropriate. But I've really come around to this idea of, no, having some guidance from on high, from the institution itself, is a really valuable thing. Not mandating necessarily any particular practices in the classroom, but giving guidance, and allowing faculty to point to something and say, hey, I came up with the language in my syllabus, with an eye toward, or with an understanding of our institutional mission as it relates to this technology. I think that's a really valuable thing. So
Yeah, and I think and I hope that Scite will be a little involved in like how the policy will evolve. Uh, Two things maybe is that I do mention academic freedom in the policy, so it's not to like restrict academic policy, and also like because when I was researching at academic freedom, it's a two-way street. It's also the students' freedom to be curious and to experiment and to test test new technologies. But so it's a two-way street. The only thing that perhaps I would like your insight into, because that's exactly the way that we're going, that we have some sort of a like a it's not like a rigid set of rules, but more like we have like a guide. Guidelines. Yeah. So you have guidelines that you can use, and but the only thing that I'm trying to be a little strict on is to because we use it was a plagiarism detector called Turnitin, and then they started putting in like the AI detectors. I created 12 essays using 3 different tools, and we tested them with Turnitin, and we saw that it was not very accurate in figuring out AI, but it was good with the plagiarism, which it's originally designed for. And one of the principles that we are putting out in an annex is like the use of these AI detectors should not be grounds for like accusing students of academic dishonesty.
I could not possibly agree with you more. I think well, a few things to say about that. Again, nothing. I use Turnitin, and I've used it for years as part of writing assignments and plagiarism detection. But AI is a very different world, and if you actually go to Turnitin, last I checked, they had a sort of a FAQ, a Q&A section about their their AI detection component, and not only do you say that it shouldn't be used as the sort of last word on whether or not a written piece contained was written by AI. Not only do you say that, but they say that themselves, to their immense credit. From my perspective, it's not even like the inability to catch instances of AI where they occurred, but it's the false positive that's really the sort of ethical concern from my perspective as a professor. I would rather hundreds of students just get away with turning in AI when I ask them not to, than falsely accuse one student and failing that student from the class, because I said that they used AI and they actually didn't. It's a bit of this sort of better the 100 men guilty men go free than one innocent man goes to jail kind of thing. I think that the potential for false positives in that sort of detection landscape is really problematic. There are some interesting ideas in terms of like watermarking and other sort of innovations about that, but I just don't think that we're at a place where that's a viable path. I actually had an advisee. One of my advisees emailed me about one professor in another department that he had who had accused him of using AI, and it was a bit worse than the scenario you're describing, Magnus, in the sense that the professor, again, this is what I heard from the students, so you can take it with a grain of salt, but the professor just basically said, "I just really get the sense that you used AI on this assignment," and I was like, That's not really anything. You can't just it's just not a gut feeling sort of enterprise. You just you need hard evidence, and that's just not a thing that we can actually generate at the moment. So I this is why I take the approach that I take, and I think it's just much more effective and to embrace the technology and figure out ways of dealing with the consequences. One thing that I like to point out is that professors have for centuries um, implicitly accepted the fact that every now and then there's going to be a student who will, say, get their husband or wife or boyfriend or girlfriend or parent to write a paper for them. Um, this has been going on for a long time. I had fellow students when I was in college who, their boyfriend had written the paper for them and they barely even knew what was in it. And students have been buying papers from other students for as long as the academy has probably existed. So, this makes that kind of problem easier to access. It makes that sort of behavior easier to do, but it's not really a new problem. It's just a new instantiation of a problem that has existed forever.
Yeah, I think that's very well put, and I think that just during this semester, I have felt like a reduction in the like almost the police mindset of teachers to be very like afraid and like tough on like all the students are using it. Like, okay, yes, all the students are using it, but are they using it as to help themselves and delivering better results and getting a better education, or are they cheating? There's a whole. It's like in law, like it's are they using it in good faith or are they using it in bad faith? I think that's maybe the simplest way to frame it.
Yeah, no, that I really I like that actually, that good faith, bad faith. I may steal that from you actually at some point. I'll try to give you credit if I can remember to do so. But
How?
it,
Yeah.
it's interesting that you say that about and I'm sorry, I how, the pronunciation of your institution. Remind me how to pronounce it. I don't want to butcher it.
University of Akureyri.
Akureyri.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm very aware of my lack of pronunciation abilities. Yeah, so it's very interesting to hear that University of Akureyri is actually you're seeing that too over the as recently as like the past like term, the most recent term. I would say I've seen the exact same thing here at Murray State where I teach. It seems that it's almost as if over the past 6 months there's been a real sort of sea change. There's been a real phase shift, whatever you want to call it, in just sort of the underlying acceptance of the technology and engagement with it from professors, who I think probably a couple of years ago were just very much opposed to any kind of engagement with the technology at all. I've seen a much greater willingness to explore, the positive aspects of text generative AI than, like I said, even probably a year or two ago.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that's happening both at where I am in the States and where you are in Iceland. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a global phenomenon. This rapid rise of generative AI. But I'm also very interested because you are a psychologist. Are you like a clinical psychologist?
No, 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 no. I'm very upfront about this. I am not I don't help people. I don't do any of that. I'm a social psychologist by training. So the
Okay.
PhD was in social psychology and quantitative methods. So yeah, statistics and social psych are sort of my home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because one of the challenges here that I've been trying to mitigate and address during the like I've been uh, like it is expected of me to deliver a policy or to work on a policy that which will be like a guiding policy and it's the final sentence of the policy said that in 2027 we hope that this policy won't be required because it will be integrated into like other policies of the institution, so it will just be a norm, we will normalize it.
Interesting.
However, one thing that has been a challenge for me, and it's been nagging me a little bit, is because if we look at like the concept called like a digital work intensification, like the psychological cost on working with an AI system because they are getting smarter faster. They don't require like breaks or they're just and I have hit some like I've seen it in myself, like multitasking, feeling like I'm feeding the machine, like working very fast, but at a tremendous psychological cost because you get like fatigued and tired and so it's a like how can we mitigate that this won't lead to higher levels of stress and like burnout and like mental challenges in knowledge work.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually this is the question that I think we should be asking more of. And because we don't ask it very much, I'm the least confident in my position on this. Um, just because it doesn't come up as often as it should. I think, yeah, that's going to be a part of having to adapt to, not just as a professor, but as an employee, as a citizen. There are challenges associated with that, and I'm like, I was having a conversation with Greg Lukianoff, he's an author. He's president of the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, and he's written a couple of pieces, a couple of books, I guess, about that relate to the sort of existence of new technology, and he's talking in particular about social media, but it applies to AI tools as well. Like I brought it to him. I said, he wrote. He wrote extensively about some of the mental health concerns associated with the existence of social media, and, I just pointed out to him, well, I mean, you can make the same argument about any transformative technology, like the printing press and the social upheaval that the printing press introduced to Europe. And I said, I mean, come on, it's the printing press. It's obviously a good thing in the aggregate that we can like reproduce books and pamphlets at scale. And he looked at me, he was like, yeah, he nodded. And he said, that's true, but it doesn't mean that it was fun to live through that period. And I think that's absolutely true. And I was like, damn it, that's a really good point. Um, so I think the same thing kind of applies. The technology I think is overwhelmingly in the aggregate is a good thing, and I'm glad that we have it. I mean, it literally is the stuff of like Star Trek and being able to talk to a computer and say, "Computer, give me this thing," and all of a sudden it just kind of comes up and materializes. It really is, in the aggregate, a good thing. But that doesn't mean that, there aren't going to be challenges, or, that there isn't going to be some unpleasantness associated with living through the period where we all had to adapt to that technology, both on an individual level in terms of, mental health, but also at a societal level, and all of the uncertainty that brings with it. We should be aware of that. And, I think that we at Scite are pretty honest and upfront about, what we're good at and what we're not good at. And then the challenges associated with it. So yeah.
Yeah, I think like the rediscovery of the human rhythm will be a like a long-term challenge. But I think that if students are like if we prepare the next generation, because I think like the initial shock for people that have built their careers on knowledge, which is freely available right now. Yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah.
like you
Yeah,
said,
exactly.
it's it's freely available right now. So you have to figure out like what can I contribute to, and I think that like my wife, she teaches grad school, like first like 6-year-olds,
Okay. Okay.
and like we have to prepare the next generation on how to work with the technology, and hopefully like not leave them with a society that just asks the computer and says like, we don't really understand how it works, we just ask this box here.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think that will be like some, when AI, because I don't know in Iceland, in how it is in your state, but right now in Iceland, it's still a bit of a fringe dialogue on like the possible effects of AI on labor and on education and everything. It's because it has not happened. It is happening.
Yes.
So I think short term we will hopefully be able to like be able to train students on using it without burning themselves out, because I think burnout and stress is a huge challenge in knowledge work and just in society as a whole, because we've never in the history of man, we have never had the opportunities to lead a better life.
No, I mean, I think that this brings to mind something I've been thinking of a good bit lately, which is, how are expectations going to change in terms of, and not specific, to, the university or to any particular institution, but just more broadly, how are our general expectations going to change based on the fact that this technology exists. I mean, so I used to say, like, I used to, tell my students, hey, there was a time, like in like the late 90s when you might be at dinner with some friends and you might say, hey, yeah, what was the name of that actor who he was in that movie, with it was about that small town, and there was this church leader, and what's her name was in it, but the lead role, what was the name of that guy? What was the name of that actor? And you would all sit there, and nobody could come up with the name, and you would just leave it. That would just be it. You would just leave the conversation not knowing the answer.
Yeah.
And of course, now the expectation is that at some point early on, somebody's going to pull out their phone and they're going to, do some Googling or do some, some AI tooling and going to, just figure out the answer to the question. I mean, one thing that I could see happening just because this technology exists is that, and I've already seen it actually in my classes, um, the quality of the writing has gone up.
Mhm.
And again, I allow my students to use Site Assistant on their, like their term paper in one particular class in particular. It's just better writing. It's easier to read. I wonder now, I mean, yeah, that does raise questions about, some of my colleagues in the English department who teach, writing, as a discipline. Um, but it also raises questions about, are we, just going to expect that written products, because of the, people can use AI to aid in that process, is the quality of writing and the extent to which writing is well informed, is that going to go up in the aggregate? Certainly we have problems, certain AI tools have problems with, hallucinating, and we at Site, that's been a big area where we've really focused on addressing. But saying things that aren't necessarily true. I mean, I think that as a whole, that problem will become less and less of an issue. And, does that just expect that everything that we read is just incredibly well informed and incredibly well written? I mean, maybe not. Maybe it goes the opposite direction. I don't know, but that is one possibility, just in terms of social adjustment and our broader expectations of one another. Um, and just, I think it's an open question.
Yeah, I think so, and I think in one of the papers I recently wrote was that we have to accept that we don't know. We have to be able to function through the chaos, and just to like accept that we cannot find uh, solutions, because there are hundreds of institutions and individuals trying to find the solutions, and if you dig deep, they always come up with like, we think it's like this, but we're not sure. So we have to be brave to test, and allow, and like creating some like psychological safety to be able to open for mistakes, and then again with the good faith and the bad faith, like our if the mistake is made in good faith, like, okay, what can we learn from it? How can we address this, and how can we like reduce the likelihood of it happening again?
100%. This is one of my favorite things to do when I'm like supervising a graduate thesis is, if the results are sort of inconclusive, well, the thing I like students sort of naturally gravitate towards, well, I need to sort of, explain away this finding that didn't go the way I expected, or I need to, really attach it to this theory and I say, oh, that's great. You need to explain things in light of other research and in the light of existing theory from other areas. But, you should probably include at the end of your paper somewhere, it's okay to say, this is an open question. We just don't know. And that's, I find that for, it's in fact, interestingly, for the for the really smart graduate students who do, very impressive work,
Mhm.
um, in particular, they have a hard time saying that. It's just sort of very counterintuitive to them that no, their position should be that this is an open question and we don't have a firm answer to it. And that's okay. It's okay to admit that. Better to admit that now than to attach yourself to a proposition that could very likely later on prove to be completely wrong, and then have to backtrack. Right? I mean, if you're thinking about the a trajectory in scientific research that could span decades, right? Better to be honest about it uh, from the outset.
And I think that you It reminded what you were discussing reminded me of a book I recently read called "When We Cease to Understand the World" by Benjamin Labatut. And it's like uh, it is like it's like a surreal non-fiction. It's fiction, but it has some real. It discusses real people and mostly scientists, and like how when you gain more knowledge and understanding in a certain field, you keep working on getting more knowledge, and eventually you come to a place where like we can't explain this. We are at the like subatomic level, and we don't understand what's going on there, and we just have to accept. So
Yeah, no, this is. I'll have to look this up. Actually, I've heard of this. I've heard of this book. I need to just actually get a copy and actually read it. Finally,
yeah,
very interesting.
it's very interesting, and I think that like in it because going deep into the rabbit hole of possibilities of AI futures is pretty rough. But when you look at like prior rapid progress in science, you can see similarities. Uh, but I think that we are in a very we have a very strong uh, possibility of creating, like in the post turmoil, to have a to have a much better society and a more equal society. But of course, there are dangers. Mostly how people will apply the technology. But I think tools like Scite will be very valuable in training our students and making it accessible to both students and faculty to have like a single solution, so we can try to like teach students at the first year to use it. But perhaps when we wrap it up, is like one thing that I am very interested in, as I introduced you a little to my background, which is a bit diverse, is like using AI and using tools like ChatGPT Deep Research or Google Deep Research or Site Assistant or anything. I think we're there's a new field of like interdisciplinary science, because the models, they don't care about the silo that they're working in.
Yeah. Um, yeah, no, this is, I think this is something I've been, actually has been in my head for a while now is that, I think about the people who trained me in my PhD program, um, very smart people, undoubtedly, top people in their areas of specialization, um, brilliant people. But it's always interesting to me that, and this is just the way that the academy has kind of organized itself is, you know, people at the top of their field know know their area of specialization really, really, really well. But if you delve outside of that specialization, it very quickly, you have to kind of choose, am I going to know, a limited set of things really well, or am I going to know a broader set of things, you know, okay, I'm going to do a better job of knowing a broader set of things at the cost of not knowing every sort of specific nuance about the one thing that I like got my PhD in. And I've over the years, I've just, I guess, come to think of myself more as a sort of a generalist, as a sort of, I'm a social scientist more broadly, just in the terms of what interests me. And I think that, probably one thing that we might see is the rise of an increased importance of generalists, people who have a much more wide-ranging knowledge of topics, and come to expect that because that's the kind of information those tools are able to access. If I want, I mean, I can ask Site Assistant to, give me, show me the commonalities between the works of Chaucer and the, theory of dyadic morality. It can probably come up with something there, right? Even though that's a weird, Venn diagram with a tiny amount of overlap, it'll be able to find that tiny overlap and tell me what it's about. So I 100% agree, and I think that this could actually be useful in terms of highlighting the importance of a wider knowledge base that's not sort of, a mile deep but an inch wide. Um,
Yeah, yeah. And I've actually used this same term that like we're witnessing like the age of generalists. So that has to be reflected in the like training of university students, and it's the like those who will be hit hardest will be like the specialists. So I think it will be like the requirement will be to have a big group of generalists, and then you have like the hyper specialists, like who are like uh, who are like working at some very very edge cases of their field.
yep. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it is entirely possible that, the people who were educated in a very specific area of, a specific area of scholarship, frankly, like myself, are just not going to be as valued or even valued at all going forward. I mean, I do see a path where that is the case, and that's something we're going to have to adapt to, definitely.
Yeah. So I have two questions as like a closing reflection.
Sure.
Then you can add some if you'd like. Like, what would you say to early career researchers or new university students who are like excited about the new tools like Scite, but also overwhelmed by the pace of technological change?
Um, I guess the number one thing that I would say is go easy on yourself. And that, it's I remember when I started in my first master's degree, and really just the earliest years of grad school, probably throughout grad school to a certain degree, just feeling just this sort of sense of terror of, what if I don't know the answer to this question and I'm supposed to know it? Or what if I ask a question of someone that in the aggregate, that on balance is maybe, not a terribly good question, or that maybe the answer should have been obvious, and just feeling like that was kind of the end of the world. And one thing that I have really learned, after doing this for quite some time, is that it's okay to just not know, even if it's necessarily something that on balance, yeah, you should have known that. You should still get good and comfortable with the fact that there are going to be some things that maybe you should know, but that you don't know. And I imagine that is, amped up to 1,000% in the current environment, for the exact reasons that you just mentioned. So the first thing I'd say is, go easy on yourself and get comfortable with the fact that sometimes you're going to maybe fall short of, knowing what the latest findings on this topic were, or how this event relates to this theory or whatever it is. Go easy on yourself and get good and comfortable with, feeling like, oh yeah, I guess I should have known that. Okay. It's like I tell my students, when I pose a question to the class, and it's an open question, or it could be something with a specific answer, and nobody says anything. And then inevitably, if I just let the sort of discomfort set in with the uncomfortable silence, and like 15 or 20 seconds go by, eventually there'll be one student who just can't take it anymore. And they'll finally raise their head and they'll say, I think this. And then they'll answer the question. And I'll say, there you go. See, you were able to answer the question. And you know what happens if you were wrong? Nothing. Nothing happens. Nothing happens. Nobody in the room spontaneously combusts. Everything. I don't think any less of you. I can guarantee you your fellow students don't think any less of you. You were just wrong, and we just move on. Become okay with that. Sorry, that was a bit long-winded, but yeah, that's I guess that's the big answer that I have. There are other smaller responses I could give, but that's the big one.
Yeah, but I think it was a very good message to be like go easy on yourself and like be kind to yourself, because and please don't feel like you have to compete with AI models, because then you will be racing a marathon against a Formula One car.
Yes, exactly. Yes. It's not a fair fight, right?
It's not a fair fight.
And it's not playing to your strengths. It's playing to the strengths of the technology, and individual human beings have strengths that this technology will not be able to match. So I think, especially in the realm of creativity, there are lots of areas where that competition is much more on the human side. So
Yeah. And then we have discussed a little bit about like the sheer volume of scientific literature being published, which will I think Amazon just made some like a filtering system that you can only publish 30 books per day as an author on Amazon, because they are publishing, like, books are being published written by AI, like on massive scales. And of course, like so I'm not trying to create some echo chamber here, but one of the challenges that I see is like finding worthy objectives, like figuring out like real solutions to real problems. Uh, but so where do you think, like, what gives you hope about science right now?
oh gosh. Um, so no, I think that's interesting. You mentioned that statistic or that policy at Amazon. I was unaware of that, but that doesn't surprise me. Um, I guess one thing that I'm hopeful that is related to that is I think it might be possible that we can begin to, get connected to the fact that this technology exists, maybe expect more from less. I mean, we are going through that period where, yeah, there's just a bunch of stuff being churned out by, ChatGPT or whatever, and being put into books. But, um, I am wondering if we'll circle back to, maybe expecting that, researchers produce a smaller amount of scholarship, but that thanks to the existence of this technology, it's much better scholarship. Um, because like the value of, the quality of work that is generated, from text generative AI, in my experience is relatively, it varies, but it's relatively flat. And really what I'm excited to see is the use of that technology by people who are experts in their field to produce a smaller amount of work, but work that is of much greater quality. And I'm always reminded by the quote from Peter Higgs, Higgs boson, that guy, who he says, I would never have gotten tenure if in today's environment. I'm not productive enough. Um, and so I'm a little bit hopeful that we'll learn to use this technology to increase the quality of output, and maybe in the process that volume of actual human written research will go down, and maybe actually that is a proportion. Maybe that's actually a good thing. Um, so I guess that's part of it. And I also, I hope that, one of the lessons that we've learned in my field in social psychology, I do hope that we have actually learned from, some of our previous mistakes with findings that don't replicate. I mean, this is big, and, this is why I'm big on the open science movement and transparency and research. I am really hopeful that those lessons from, large lines of research in my area that just don't replicate. I am hopeful that those lessons will stick, and that yeah, that we'll place a greater premium on transparency going forward. Maybe not necessarily even being right more often, but just that it will be more open and transparent about the instances when we were wrong. Um,
Yeah, I think I'm gonna quote you on that, on like the smaller amount of work of higher quality, because I think that could be like a good guideline.
I,
Like,
I, I yeah, it's aspirational, right? Yeah.
yeah, it's aspirational, and it's for Amazon. You can only publish 3 self-published books per day. So
The How dare they? Yeah.
how dare they? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
restricting my freedom of expression.
Exactly.
Well, Sean, it's been a true pleasure chatting with you, and getting your like valuable insights, and we really look forward to starting our formal uh, implementation on site, and we see that we will face many challenges, but I think it will be a net benefit for like the whole of the university.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's been a really fun conversation, and anything that we can do to help, with your institution and drafting any of those policies or integrating the tool. Yeah, just let me know. We're excited to have y'all on board as a partner institution, and yeah, thanks for making the time.
Thank you. Dr. Sean Rife, Professor of Psychology. Thank you very much for appearing on Taming Technology.